Welcome to Is It Observable, the YouTube channel providing tutorials on how to observe a given technology. Today's episode is part of an existing series related to a cloud technology named Kubernetes. So we already have several episodes where we explain how to retrieve metrics with the help of Prometheus, how to retrieve logs with Loki, and then we did Flint bit. And now we'll cover a very useful angle of the Kubernetes observability, the events. If you enjoy today's content, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. So let's see what you're going to learn out of this episode. So we'll do a short introduction about events and the life cycle of the various Kubernetes objects. Then we will just remind the structure of the event object when you utilize the API, and you'll see that it's not only the API. We will touch base few type of events that we should pay attention to. And I would like to present a couple of solutions available to retrieve the events, but I will focus mainly on two of those solutions because at the end, of course, like usual, we'll do a tutorial utilizing two of those solutions, and I'm referring to the event exporter and Kspan. So let's start with the introduction. As you may all know, Kubernetes is generating lots of events.
Oh, poop.
Related to deployment, of our workload, the scheduling of our pods, and more. Kubernetes events is a really rich source of information to understand what is currently happening in our cluster. So if a pod has been killed or restarted, but just by looking at the event, we have a pretty good understanding on what is currently happening in our cluster. To understand the issue, you can describe your pod. So using kubectl describe pod and then the ID of your pod, and you will see all the various events. But you can also utilize another command called kubectl get events, and that will list the events for a specific resource. So usually events is the first thing to look at to understand if you have any infrastructure problems or application problems. Every Kubernetes object is going on several states until reaching the desired state. As we explained in the first episode of Kubernetes metrics, the master node and the worker node has several core components that will allow Kubernetes to orchestrate the workload on our servers. If you remember well, the scheduler schedule pod on the node. The control manager detects state changes to reschedule the pod in case of a crash or whatever it is. And etcd will store the status of the various Kubernetes resources, but only for 1 hour. All those core components are able to orchestrate our workload, restart, update, and everything is done based on events. So events is really important to understand our given situation. So let's take a really short example. If I deploy a pod, everything starts with a scheduler. So the scheduler will try to identify the node where it has to start the pod, based on the resources, based on the memory, based on the taints. There's a lot of things that will select the node. At that particular moment, the pod is in a pending state. Once the scheduler has identified the right node, then the pod will be in a creating state. To start this pod, of course, it's based on containers. We need to pull the image from a Docker registry. In fact, it's the node who will pull the image from the external Docker registry. The scheduler has also a preference to schedule pods where the nodes have already the image, so it's faster. Once the image has been pulled, the pod will change state to running. If for some reason your pod crash due to, I don't know, application errors, or there is a memory issue, or whatever it is, then the control manager will reschedule the pod. But if the pod is crashing again and again, and Kubernetes is restoring several times and having the same error, then the pod will go to a specific state, crash, loop, back off. And I'm pretty sure you know this one. Oh. You can have pods also stuck in pending. So what does that mean? Pending. Oh yeah. It could mean that there are no resources available on our nodes, or there is an infrastructure problem on our nodes. So the scheduler is not able to find a node to host our pod. Pod also have, as you may know, health probes and readiness probes. Those health and readiness probes are there to help Kubernetes to determine the state and the health of our pod. So you can either use an HTTP probe, like you define an endpoint on your container, and this endpoint will return a response that Kubernetes can check. So /health, for example, or /ready, or whatever. Kubernetes, in fact, the component in charge of checking the health and the readiness is Kubernetes. Yes, of course, Kubernetes. He will reach out to all those endpoints, or even it could be just a program to launch. You can also define an init container with a specific image. So Kubernetes will first start the init container and then run the others containers. And you can also have an end sort of container that will be executed before killing or stopping the pod. If you're giving a wrong image in your deployment file, so there's a connect. So basically, the node tries to pull out an image which doesn't exist, so he will just have errors. Or if your Docker registry requires to authenticate and you didn't pass the right password, the password's changed, then he won't be able to pull out the image. So your pod will never reach the running state. So if you describe your pod, you will see that image pull back off event is there. So let's jump into the structure of the event from an API's perspective. So we mentioned the events can be retrieved with the help of the Kubernetes API. So either just in a pure HTTP call, or you can utilize kubectl. In fact, kubectl is just interacting with the API. So when you describe a pod or you get events, then basically it's interact with the API, and the structure of the object event that you're receiving is exactly the one that you will have from an HTTP perspective. There are a few attributes or properties related to the event. So you got the message, the details about what's going on, the reason. So there are clearly some hard-coded reasons in the Kubernetes code. For example, image pull back off, or those are reasons. The type, warning, information, error. The object involved in the event. The kind, it could be a pod, it could be a stateful set, stuff like this. And then the great thing is not pushing events on and on. Once he has detected an event, he's just counting the number of occurrences of an event. Also the source of the event. Who has detected the event? So it could be kubelets, it could be others, of course. The source is also very interesting information. What are the various type of events? So you have information events. So pod has been scheduled, image is pulled, node is healthy, deployment is updated, replica set is called, container is killed. Like this. This is pure information. Then you got warning. So I have a pod that has errors. I have persistent volume that is not bound yet. And so that could be a potential future error. The last is the type errors. Type errors, the node is down. The persistent volume is not found, or we're not able to connect to the persistent volume. We cannot create a load balancer on the cloud provider, for example. So all the errors that makes the entire workload not ready. But we can also, if I build my own app and I know that I will be running on Kubernetes, I can still, if I want, push my own custom events through the API of Kubernetes. So what are the Kubernetes events that we should probably pay attention to? So I'm not gonna list all the events because there's tons of them, and it will be very boring to list them, and it won't bring any value for us. So let's try to pay attention on the events that are important or that could be considered like a problem. Of course, if you think that there are more relevant events that we should pay attention, put a comment on the video, send me a feedback. I would love to update that content. So the first one is crash loop backoff. I mean, we all have experienced that type of event, and I've already explained it before in the interaction. Our pod is crashing, we need to know why, so we need to describe and figure out. The second type of error, which is usually, it could be either a management problem or just a pure human mistake when I define my deployment file. It's image pullback off. And the node is unable to retrieve the image. Then you have all the events related to evicted events. So this event happens when the node determined that pods needs to be evicted or terminated to free up some resources. So CPU, memory, and so on. Or you can all put some quotas on your nodes as well. So it could also be starts to evict pods in that case. So when we evict, Kubernetes, when it starts evict, it's not supposed to kill it and not restart. He will try to reschedule the pod on another node. Then you have all the events related to persistent volume. So failed mount, failed attach volume. So some pods requires to have persistent volumes. So persistent storage, so like a database, for example. So these events will prevent the pod to start, because if there's no volume for the database, then of course there will be major errors on the application level. So basically Kubernetes will check that the desired volume of persistent storage is accessible. And if it is, then it will let the pod run. Then you have the events related to failed scheduling events. So this happened when the scheduler is not able to find any nodes to run your pods. So there are, in that type of events, are basically related to the node. So there are events that are clearly dedicated to the nodes, like node not ready, rebooted, host port conflict, and so on. Let's jump into the various solutions available to retrieve the events. So you have Event Router, you have KubeWatch. So KubeWatch is interesting. It's a Kubernetes event watching tool that tracks every resource changes in a KubeWatch. So basically, KubeWatch supports notification, and it will be able to publish notification in Slack, HipChat, web, or send a webhook call, Flock, SNMP, and so on. So it's pretty interesting because it will notify a third-party product that something is going on your Kubernetes cluster. You have Kubernetes Event Exporter and Sloop, and last, Kspan. So today, I would like to highlight specifically two solutions, like I explained. The Event Exporter. So it will expose events count in a Prometheus format. So basically you deploy a pod. That pod, of course, requires to have the right cluster role to be able to interact with the API. So it's retrieve the events and then count them and utilize a Prometheus client. We mentioned that on our PromQL episode. And it will basically create two counters that will count the number of events per type with different labels. So you can do a lot of interesting queries for sure. And Event Exporter is way much simpler concept, but it's pretty much powerful. And a lot of observability solution out there already has the support of that type of feature. So Dynatrace, for example, has it, but we will still, in our tutorial, we'll deploy it, not to bring value to Dynatrace. It's just that the rest of the tutorial will be based on Dynatrace. So let's continue the tutorials, everything on Dynatrace. So Kspan is a project built by Weavework. The concept is simple. Kspan has a pod. That pod needs, of course, to have the right cluster role, similar to Event Exporter, to interact with the API to collect events from the various resources of your cluster. So if you have any custom resource definition, don't remember to add in your cluster role also those new resources, so also Kspan can interact and the events of those new objects. So Kspan will collect the events, no surprise, and it will turn them into OpenTelemetry span. It will try to join them, group them into an OpenTelemetry trace, which is really cool, to be honest. You can understand precisely the lists and the history of the events that happens. So Kspan create that spans, and then you could basically, it will export it to a collector. So it utilizes at the moment the OpenTelemetry gRPC protocol. So if your collector that you're utilizing doesn't currently support the OpenTelemetry gRPC protocol, then it would make sense to export it to an OpenTelemetry collector that will receive the traces, and you will then export it to your solution. So Dynatrace currently supports HTTP protobuf OpenTelemetry protocol. So in my case, in that tutorial, we will basically deploy an OpenTelemetry collector. So Kspan will send the traces to the OpenTelemetry collector, and then the OpenTelemetry collector will send the traces to Dynatrace on the API to ingest OpenTelemetry traces.
So, like every tutorial that we do in Easy Observable, you will have a dedicated GitHub repository with the various instructions to do this tutorial at your home at your own pace. So today's tutorial is about events, like expected, and like explained, I want to utilize Dynatrace to send over the Kspan traces. So that will be a good exercise. And also I want to showcase the event exporter. The event exporter could be connected with Prometheus, of course, but here in our case we use Dynatrace. That also have the ability to do the similar feature than event exporter, but here it's more about showing you how to ingest Prometheus metrics with Dynatrace as well. All right, so first thing, if you are not a Dynatrace user, no problem. You can go to Dynatrace, and in Dynatrace, you have the options to do a free trial, and you will be able to get a new fresh Dynatrace tenant for this tutorial. So in my case, I already have my own Dynatrace tenant available. The thing that I have to do here is obviously to connect a new Kubernetes cluster, which is mine. the one we use for this tutorial. So I'm going to click here on Kubernetes, and I have the ability, so I already have one cluster here available, and I can basically click on add cluster to add a new cluster. So here, let's give it a name and put it is it observable, something like this. So it's a Kubernetes platform. And you need 2 tokens, so I can let Dynatrace generate this token for me, so I don't have to worry about it. And then I will, in my case, I'm using JKE, so I'm going to enable the volume storage as well. So here you can see there is a command here available. So the only thing that I have to do is copy this one, bring up my terminal. Here it is. And I just simply have to paste this one. So I am now up. So now the Kubernetes monitoring is successfully set up. So now I can click on show deployment to figure out where it is. And you need to make some traffic. And once the traffic has been generated, then you will see your new cluster in this page. All right, so the deployment of the monitoring of our cluster with Dynatrace has been done. You see, it was very, very easy and not a big deal, in fact. 2 things I want to do first. I want to enable a few features. So here, no metrics coming in because the traffic is there like expected. But here, I want to click on this one, and I want to jump into the Kubernetes settings. And you see there is few things I'd like to look at in our is it observable tenant. So here I want to enable monitor annotated Prometheus exporters, because here this is what we are going to do at the end of the day. And also thing that I'd like to do is monitor the events, because we were going to collect them with Prometheus, but naturally we also have events coming in with Dynatrace. So those 2 things have to be done. So I want to also to use those events in the analysis and alerting, of course, and include all the events for Davis. Davis is the AI of Dynatrace, and in case of major issues or problems related to our cluster, I will be notified by the Dynatrace AI as well. So I'm going to save this one. Here it is. Oh, yes, one thing I need to remove. So here you see requires a valid certificate. So here in my case, I will just remove this one because it's just not a production cluster. It's just a tutorial cluster. So no big deal. So I'm just gonna so first step has been done. So we have been installed. We have a cluster. We have deployed our Kubernetes operator there, and now I want to do is to deploy the event exporter. So let's bring me the source code briefly. I mean the one that you will find in GitHub, of course. And I'm going to show you 2 things. So here I'm going to deploy. So here is my deploying file of the event exporter. And by the way, before we do that, I'm just going to round of applause for the project. So you can find here is the URL of the GitHub repository for the event exporter. And here it explains everything, the type of metrics coming in. In fact, there's 2 major metrics coming in on our Prometheus formats. The one is kube event count and kube event unique events total. So it's two counters, like described before. So here I just have, already have added my in my repo the deployment files and everything. So you can see here it's the event exporter. So everything is related to what you can find in GitHub, the GitHub repo of the project. The only thing I have added here is by default you will have the Prometheus annotations on the deployment. of this particular component. And you can see here just underneath, I have added 3 annotations to let Dynatrace automatically scrap the metrics from this exporter. So Dynatrace won't reach out to Prometheus directly. He will reach out to the Prometheus exporter that we are going to deploy. All right, so that was the thing that I wanted to show you. So the only thing that we have to do is to apply this fresh new deployment. All right, so in the repo of our GitHub repository, I have a folder for the event exporter, and you have the deployment file there. So I'm just going to do a kubectl apply on the deployment file. So event exporter, and it's deploy. All right, now it's been created. So let's jump git pods. All right, so now I can see that container creating, and now it's running. So I got the event exporter. So I'm going to do just a very quick check that the metrics are running, and I'm able to collect things to make sure that everything works like expected. So to do that, I'm going to do port forward. Why? Simply because I want to basically check that on the port 9102 there are officially Prometheus metrics exposed there. So let's jump, and so I'm going to expose on my local host the port 902, and on the local machine, on the cluster, sorry, not local machine, but on the cluster. Here it is. So now this is exposed. So the only thing I have to do is I'll go to this browser and reach out to 9102 / because it's on /metrics, and here it is. So now you can see I got metrics, and you can see that it's currently reporting a couple of events from my cluster. So everything is working like expected. So that's wonderful. I can remove this part, the port forward. I'm going to jump into Dynatrace to see if some traffic has been generated. If not, I will do it without showing it. So here it is. I got easily observable. I can see my workload, and the events has been already reported. So now that we have our cluster well monitored by Dynatrace, the quick question is, where do I see those those Prometheus metrics? Good question. So for this, you have to jump first. I mean, not first, but I would recommend to go to metrics. So if I go to metrics, here it's basically list all the metrics available in Dynatrace, and I'm going to search for one of the metrics that we have on our new fresh exporter. It's Kube Events. I don't remember. So let's Kube Event, and you can see I have the Kube Event unique total, which is the one that we were looking at. And you can see there is a notion of dimension. So basically the labels that we can find in Prometheus when we do our PromQL, they are transformed into dimension in the Dynatrace terminology. So that will help me to filter, to split, to do a lot of different operations. And then also it's also remind me the type of aggregator that I can do on this one, and so on and so forth. So you can see that we already have some couple of metrics coming in, which means it's positive. So you can either I can create a chart from here, but I want to show you the other way around. And the way that I prefer usually is to go to the metric explorer, so explore data here. And similar to what we did before, I just have to type the Kube event something. So here I can see the metrics. So I'm going to select this one. And if I run the query, I will have the similar chart that we saw before. But what is interesting here is I can split. So, and the dimensions that has been collected through this Prometheus ingest metrics. There is here objects involved name. So if I do that, I rerun the query, you can see that here it has split it by object name, which is one of the labels exposed. So you can do pretty much everything. Let's say I want to look at the reasons and the type, because the type it will be a warning and so on. So here you can see that I have split it by card service, unhealthy, warning. So that's all the three various splits. So you can do that, and then I can do basically some various aggregator operators. So here run query, count, let's say, and so on and so forth. So this is the wizard that helps you to build the query, but you can also do from a code. So code is like a query language. If you're interested to get a tutorials on how to do query on metrics in Dynatrace, let me know. I could basically try to build dedicated tutorials for that type of query language as well. All right, so now we have the metrics. We see that events exporters is working. Of course, I could have also been able to send over the metrics to Prometheus and then do the similar thing in Grafana as well. So first part is done. Yoo-hoo! Okay, now let's move to the second step, where basically I didn't do the graph that we were looking at, but I didn't mention, but here if I want, I could count from the exercise that we did, I can count, let's say I would like to do or remove this one. If I run the query, you can see the difference schedule normal. And one thing could be interesting, in fact, it's a good point. I can look at the name, the object type. Where is it? Object kind, where here it is, up. So here you can see schedule, a replica set, polling, and so on. So this is the object type is at the end, the pod. So I can basically reorder if I want it, of course. And now if I want to do like instead of a pure graph here, I would be able to do a pie chart. So here it will be basically counting that is 19 unhealthy warning pods, but the order is pretty wrong. I should reorder that. But this just give you an example on how to do stuff. It's the same thing. All right, so first piece done. Let's move on to the other one, which is Kspan. So let's have a look at Kspan. So Kspan is a project that has been like mentioned by WeaveWork. So it's still experimental. So that's why in this GitHub repo, you don't find in any getting started guide. They did a blog recently explaining it, but again, keep in mind that it's experimental. It will probably be involved and improved in the future. But I think it's a pretty interesting project because I really like the fact that you can see those traces in OpenTelemetry format. So let's have a look at it by deploying it on our cluster. So to do the deployment, first thing I need to do in Dynatrace, I need to generate an API token for our exercise. So I already have done it, so I don't have to do it twice. But keep in mind, follow these instructions to get your API token, and you need in the minimal this API right, which is ingest OpenTelemetry traces, which makes sense. So that's why I want to deploy the OpenTelemetry collector, and at the end the process will be very easy. The Kspan collects the events, transform them, send them to OpenTelemetry collector, and then the OpenTelemetry collector, it will basically export those traces to Dynatrace directly. So we're going to see that one by one. So first, there are a few things. So here I need to, in the OpenTelemetry deployment file, in fact, there is a section, so I'm going to show you it directly. It will be easier. It's here, OpenTelemetry deployment file. Here, the data is basically similar to like a sort of pipeline. showing you what's going to be, how it's going to be receiving the various traces and how to export them. And so the pipeline is, you have a receiver. I don't have any processor. I have no intent to change anything on my traces. I just want to send it over. All right. So I have two exporters. One is just for logging purposes. So if you wanted, you could remove it if you wanted, but it's for debugging purposes. I think it would make sense. Don't worry. I will do a dedicated episode on OpenTelemetry, explaining everything, the collectors and so on. So I'm not going to explain everything here, but what I like to do here is to send over to Dynatrace. I need an exporter that will basically interact with the API of Dynatrace, the OpenTelemetry ingest traces API. And to do that, of course, you need to have your API token. So that's why we have to adapt this deployment file. So either you add it manually, but I'm suggesting to do those set command here that you can see on the screen. So let me do it. All right, so I've exported my two variables. So the only thing that I have to do now is to do those set commands. So let's do the first one. Here it is, and then do the second one. All right, so now we have our files updated. So I just have to, I could basically deploy my OpenTelemetry collector as it is, but there are a few things that we need to do in Dynatrace first to be able to ingest those traces. I mean, it could work directly. It's not a problem. The only thing that we need to do as a setting is basically, there are a few information that will be sent over to Dynatrace through OpenTelemetry. And by default, Dynatrace for security purposes, it won't store by default all the span and resource attributes of your traces if you don't precise it. So here in Kspan is sending details related to our events. So the event, the kinds, similar to the thing we described on the API level. So if you don't define those span attributes, where you precise, hey, Dynatrace, please store those. Of course, Dynatrace won't store them automatically. And same thing for the resource attributes as well. So where do you do that? It's very simple. So in the settings of Dynatrace, there is in the settings screen here, there's a section called server-side monitoring, and there is spans. So spans is everything related to OpenTelemetry. So spans attributes, you can see here, I have already created them. So I just have to create simply the name of the attributes that I would like to store. And I also did the same thing with the resource attributes, so the service name, service instance. So if you don't do that, then the consequence, like explained, is that Dynatrace is not going to store the information because it could be sensitive, in fact. By not storing it, it's going to be just not very useful because we won't understand which objects is involved on the event, whether the kind, the reason, and it's going to be unproductive. All right, so now the settings has been done. So we have two things to do here in this deployment. So we need first to deploy roles for Kspan. The roles that has been utilized is basically a cluster role to be able to list, to get the events from the API on various objects. So that's basically what you're going to find on this the file. So I'm not going to show it, but I'm just going to apply it. So you can see Kspan up, and here it is. So now I have the cluster roles and the cluster role binding defined. Second, I'm going to deploy our OpenTelemetry collector. So now it also deploy the config map, the service, the deployment, and everything. And last is our Kspan. So now we have the components that will interact with Dynatrace. And now I am deploying the Kspan Kspan solution that will interact with the OpenTelemetry collector. So now we have deployed Kspan, and it's connected to Dynatrace. We need to generate some workload. To do that, we're going to deploy SockShop, which is here. The instructions are here, so I'm just going to simply copy paste this part here and deploy it on my cluster. It's great. And no, so let's have a look at just the pods of this new application to see if it's running. So I should collect some traces normally in Dynatrace. So let's move on to Dynatrace and see what we have. So all the distributed traces are exposed in the menu called Application and Microservices, and there is a section called Distributed Traces. And here you can see that there are several things coming on. So here there is a so we did it in a few seconds ago. So there is a deployment update. So if I expand it, it's on the SockShop production. And in fact, yes, I use kubectl, so it makes sense. I agree. So you can see that there's real things. So because we didn't do a big deployment, but several deployments, they are each of those deployments has its own trace, in fact. So let's pick one of them. So here I have a deployment update. There's a replica set, and you can see that the poll has been scheduled. The pod has been pulled, created, started, pulled, created, and so on. Pulled and health. So now it's currently unhealthy because we have an unhealthy probe. So if you look at the timing here, I'm able to see exactly what happened here on the various phases. And because I did an update, that's the reason why it keeps basically the trace for your deployment. So if you do any changes and you did the deployment 2 weeks ago, then the overall timing will be 2 weeks ago. So that would be quite impressive. So let's pick another one which has 3 seconds here, or 8 seconds. Let's say this one. So if we look at this, so here you can see there is a persistent volume update. So I can see all those various events coming in, which is pretty interesting, to be honest. Here we have a trace which is much more easier to read. So you see here the update took about 8 seconds, and then you can see all the various phases here. So pod scheduled, pod failed, and then pod rescheduled, and then he was able to start it here, and then you can see all of the various phases. So it's very interesting because at the end you feel the process on how the pods are running. So it's an interesting project. I think in terms of usage, I would prefer, to be honest, the ability of building graphs and alerting. So metrics, I think, with the exporters makes sense. But keep in mind that if you're using Dynatrace, that those events could be transformed in metrics naturally because they are naturally collected. So you don't need necessarily to utilize the event exporters if you use Dynatrace.
So that's it for today's episode related to Kubernetes events. I hope that you learned quite a few things related with today's tutorial. The advantage of Kspan, event router, and all event exporter, of course. So try it by yourself. Let me know what you think of those solutions. Give me your feedback. And if you like the video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. See you soon for another episode. Bye.